you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Sixth Sense Report.
Hear ye, come one, come all. You are listening to the Sixth Sense Report with Joel Nikoloff and Darnell Samuels.
Man, I think we're technically, this is going to be our third guest, or our guest appearing for the third time. Is that, I think I might be correct there. I think we've had a couple two-timers, and IJ will technically be a third appearance on the show. He's in the elite class.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here with you guys, Joel and Darnell.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. And actually, this is going to be our 150th episode.
Wow.
Hopefully, yeah, it comes out. So there you go, man. You're special.
I'm honored.
Yeah. So you know, our listeners are familiar with you. If they're not, they can check out episode 118. IJ Makan moves, doing big things. So if you don't know about them, check out episode 118. But for this episode, we wanted your expertise as you live in Ottawa, and of course the trucker convoy and all the drama that went on with it. Mm-hmm. But we just wanted to know, like, what was your take on the government confiscating the Freedom Convoy's money?
Yeah, I mean, I was at the convoy, at the Freedom Convoy, a few times, and in my experience, that I was there on the ground, boots on the ground, there was none of this. The way that MSM portrayed it, the mainstream media portrayed it, made it seem like it was dangerous to walk down. Right? If I were to walk down as a colored person, I would get attacked. I walked down, there was nothing. Like, everybody was waving, you know, talking to each other, giving out food, their kids. It was totally different vibe than what you were getting on the mainstream media. And so when I, you know, and then the way that it was being portrayed in the media clearly seemed to have an effect on what the Liberal government, the steps that the Liberal government took. And I think that was scary to me when that happened. So when the Emergency Act passed, right? And it was the first time since 1988 that it got passed, and there was no war. And the reasoning they provided had nothing to do with violence, right? They stated that there was hate speech, people with opinions that were not good. And so once that happened, and we had the government asking banks to freeze accounts, and then they reached out to crypto companies to try to freeze accounts of people involved in the convoy. That was a big no for me. That took me completely by surprise, and it was something that I have spoken about before, not on a podcast, but I'd written about it before. Where? I'm trying to remember where I wrote it. It might have been on my Facebook about a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Oh, I thought you meant your blog that you had.
No, I don't think I've written this on my blog yet. But I had written about the incoming unbanking that was going to happen. And that's essentially what happened here, right? So we had seen for the past few years deplatforming of people who had dissenting opinions, right? From social media, obviously the most notorious one being Donald Trump, who got removed from Twitter permanently. Even though we have terrorist groups still on Twitter, but Donald Trump got removed. And so, and then during that, even during the election, there were some things that some of the big tech companies were doing that I just couldn't fathom that they would do, right? PayPal, for example, would remove its services from, you know, certain clothing companies that were selling, say, pro-Trump shirts. Now, whether you like Trump or not, right? That's beside the point. The point
different
here is, yeah, it's a totally different. But here, PayPal was removing its services, so now these companies could no longer accept payments. And then one step further, and this is where it got very scary. It's that the centralized platforms like Shopify started removing shops from Shopify. So there was one particular company that was selling a "Make America Great" shirt, and that shop was making, I forget how many thousands of dollars a month leading up to the election. And then when Shopify found out, I don't know how they found out, they just completely banned that, deplatformed that store. And the reason this is important is when this was happening, the conversation for most people was like, oh, well, should this happen? This is hate speech. No. The real conversation was, how far will this go? Mm-hmm. And if the government gets involved, how far will this go? And now we've seen it, which is crazy to me, that in a first world or in a developed country, in a democratic country, we have the government deplatforming or unbanking her citizens.
Unbanking.
Yeah, unbanking.
Is that the term?
So he's playing on some terms. So unbanked is what you would refer to, let's say people in the third world who don't have access.
Debanking is probably more accurate.
Right? So unbanked is a term, let's say, that's been thrown around. IJ, what did you just say?
Debanking is probably more accurate.
Yeah, so he's playing on the fact that we've taken banked people and made them unbanked by not allowing them access. Debanking, I think you're probably right, is a better term.
Yeah, just like deplatforming, I think. So that's scary. Yeah, so when the Liberal government started requesting these companies to debank certain individuals, and I know individuals who had their accounts frozen, and that's a scary thing. And they gave, not under $200 to the Freedom Convoy, and they had their bank freeze the account. Just think about that. This is somebody I know. Like, these are people I know, and to live,
you can't go to the grocery store.
No
cash.
No,
because assuming you have a credit card and bank, all of it's frozen. It's
all of it's frozen. They couldn't pull out anything. They couldn't use it online. They couldn't pull out from the ATM.
You know what I was gonna say, IJ, or Angel. I don't know what day it was, but there was a day where I don't know. My RBC, I bank with RBC, and it wasn't working. And I think a lot of people were kind of complaining. Everybody was complaining that, hey, how come my bank is down? Why is my online banking down?
So this, if I'm not mistaken, IJ, maybe you have a different take on this.
Yeah.
It was also around probably the same day, there was a spike in Google searches for like bank runs. And essentially, I'll tell you straight up, when all of this happened.
Sorry, Joel, but what's a bank run?
So bank runs would be, without getting too deep in, historically, when there's a concern, let's say when people have let's say war is about to happen, people would be like, I need to have cash in case I need, so people would go to the bank and pull out cash. But if people actually understand the way the system works, there's less dollars, like actual cash dollars, than there are amount balances in people's bank accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Mm-hmm. So if you pull all the money out of the bank account to the point the point that if you went to the bank and said, can I get $20? They go, well, we don't have any. What do you mean you don't have any? I have $20 in my bank account. So a bank run is the idea of like, so many people go to the bank to withdraw cash, such as the bank no longer has cash to fulfill bank balances.
Mm-hmm.
So the terminology of bank run, and I would say a whole bunch of people were logging into their accounts. Probably, did I get frozen? I tweeted something favorably for this, convoy. Am I going to get my bank? So I think a whole bunch of people were like, yeah, banking activity was massive.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I didn't donate, but I was like, if you look at my Twitter, my Instagram, my Facebook, I'm relatively pro convoy, anti-government, or critical of government is probably a better way of putting it. I moved cash. I literally took a significant portion of cash and was like, I do not want this in my bank account right now. I need to be able to protect it from tyrannical government.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the day that was happening, when IJ's friend's account got frozen, a number of people were like, I need to do something substantial. I need to wire money out. I need to move money to investments or crypto, as we'll get into a little bit.
I know a few people like yourself, Joel, who went to the bank and pulled out as much money as they can. They could, I should say, and that's what they did. And that's the scary part, is the fact that. So I mean, if we're really talking about anonymous money, cash is the most anonymous money, right? Like all illegal activities were done with cash for a number of
decades,
or
centuries.
And so, like with the but for the most part, most of us in a democratic, developed world have moved most of our financial transaction on digitally, right? We hardly use cash. Most people hardly use cash, I should say.
Right.
And so and Canada is not known for having a variety of banks, right? Canada has made banking extremely.
We have a cartel.
Centralized and extremely difficult for people to break through, whereas America is kind of different, right? There's a lot more competition.
Yeah, it's independent.
Yeah, and so we have 5 major banks. We have TD, CIBC, RBC, and a few others. But for all 5 of them, all 5 major ones, to collude with the government to restrict the movement of money of the citizens is absolutely terrifying. I don't think people really understand how terrifying it is until you ask them, okay, let's say you were on the other side. Let's say this was the Black Lives Matter protest, and then the government said, actually, everybody who gave to Black Lives Matter GoFundMe will have their bank account frozen because some people have been destroying.
Because of property rights violations.
Because of property destruction.
That could never happen, bro.
Yes, but Darnell, you're actually touching the point on its head, and I'll unpack in a second. But sorry, IJ.
That can never happen. I'm just saying, the point that IJ's making, I get it. Yeah, like we know in theory, you could never. You crazy? You gonna freeze black people bank account? Come on, man.
But I mean, that's the thing, right? It's not that, like, whoever it would be like whoever gave to the Black Lives Matter could be black, white, blue, purple, green, right? All that bank account get frozen, and that's scary. That's very, very scary to have a government have the ability to essentially force is probably. Yeah, I guess force would be the proper word. To force financial institutions to restrict the movement of money of their customers
without due process.
And here's the crazy thing, right? You guys saw, like, when GiveSendGo's website got hacked, right? All the information got leaked, and some dingbat took that CSV file or whatever file it was, and then uploaded it onto Google Maps and created that Google Map where you could track everybody.
Hold that thought, IJ. Before we go there, I just wanted to get both of your opinions, both of your 2 cents on what should happen to the 10 million plus that was confiscated. Because right now the government's like, okay, great, it's a windfall. We're going to build some roads. What are we going to do? So what do you guys think about that?
So, just for correction, it was never in the possession of the government. If I understand correctly, it's now been refunded, not from GiveSendGo, but the original one was refunded from GoFundMe. And the exception being there was $1 million, and just for argument's sake, let's say it's in Tamara Leach's account. There's $1 million there that's currently frozen. And then the rest is with an American company who told the Canadian government, you have no jurisdiction over us. So what potentially does relate is when the Ottawa mayor said, oh, we're going to sell the trucks from these truckers and that we confiscated and use that to reimburse businesses that we've closed. I mean, that closed for the last 2 weeks. And not because they've been closed for 2.5 years or 2 years from government.
Yeah.
So just a clarification, but technically your question is, well, what should happen is, I think what happened with GoFundMe, if you turn around and deem this fundraising campaign to be a problem, send the money back.
And they weren't going to send it back, right?
Yeah.
Initially they were going to take that money and distribute it to nonprofits as they saw fit.
As GoFundMe decided.
That's
So
essentially stealing
GoFundMe
people's money.
stole the money. But then there was what's great is, and I think we might have mentioned this before, the reason the money went back, if I'm not mistaken, one was DeSantis in Florida said he was going to go after them with his attorney general.
Mm-hmm.
But two, people were told, well, raise a problem with your bank and it'll be a $15 fee to GoFundMe. Well, it would have worked out that GoFundMe would have had a bigger fee than the total amount that they had confiscated. For every donor had done the $15 challenge or had done the challenge because there were so many donors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Now back to your previous point about. Sorry, what was it?
About the it was just the fact that it got people's information got leaked.
Yes. Yeah. The leaking of the information.
And people's information were doxed essentially, and it's in because.
So before we go there, I do want to unpack. This is where, go back to what we just discussed about the government freezing these assets.
Mm-hmm.
I have been saying this on the show, in personal conversations a lot. We do not want government to have power that we would give to, we would want that we would think our worst political enemy shouldn't have.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, when Darnell's laughing about, they would never freeze the black person's bank accounts, you're right, but this is the point. If you allow the politician to have that power, well, now you are dependent upon a benevolent dictator or a benevolent politician to be in charge of the power. But if the power itself requires a benevolent person, well, then we should know, out of the wisdom of history, no politician should have such power. And that's where the idea of due process being such a fundamental critique, right? If the government could do this with a warrant from a judge demonstrating blah, 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 criteria, it's a different conversation. But when the government says, this protest that is a constitutional right is no longer legal because we declare it so, then we can also do this other thing that totally violates every other aspect of rights.
And to add to that point, I think it's scary when you hear the Justice Minister David Lamenti, when he went on the news and stated that anybody who contributed to a pro-Trump movement should be worried about their bank accounts being frozen, and because they would be facing more consequences. That is terrifying, right? This is the Justice Minister saying this on public television, on national television.
He's essentially announcing authoritarian state.
But still, I'm still shocked at the fact that most people is not anecdotally, people that I have spoken with about this didn't see this as a big concern. Right. That itself is a red flag for me, where people have become so sedated with how the government's running, like how politicians are running the country, that people are blinded by how tyrannical it's becoming.
Now, would you say those people were relatively pro COVID measures?
To an extent, yes.
Because
to an extent.
I was thinking that a lot of that might have been based on, the propaganda that the government has put forward about this convoy.
Yeah.
Right? The fact that, they've been totally misrepresented, as you demonstrated or discussed earlier, based on what you experienced versus what you saw. And I would say every single person who I've heard talk has said the same thing in this sort of summary is, I had to go check it out for myself, and what I heard on the media and what I saw in person were two totally different things.
Two totally different. Yeah, it is. And I was on. We've discussed before, earlier, up until very recent, up until maybe a year or so ago, I was pro lockdown to an extent because we didn't know what was happening. And
then
the
first time you appeared on the show, we were on different ends of the spectrum on this.
And now we're not so. We're on the same side. Right. And so the people that I've spoken with are are not hardcore lockdown. They're just in the middle. They're just like, okay, we're doing this because these experts know better than me, therefore I'll agree with it and do it. But some have actually been on the other side, right? They're not pro lockdown. They're just when this whole thing happened, they assumed that the people downtown at the Freedom Convoy were all, Nazi swastika wavers, as Justin Trudeau says. But that was not the case. That was just simply not the case. And the more one ponders on how, for 3 weeks, the Freedom Convoy was up here, and Justin Trudeau, the leader of this country, refused to speak to these people. But when our current worldwide political situation in Ukraine and Russia is happening, Justin Trudeau flies out to the UK, gives a speech about individual sovereignty. That's the peak of hypocrisy, right? This guy's head is probably made of, I don't know what it's made of, like copper or something. Like, when he's leading a country, he freezes the assets of people who disagree with him, but then outwardly, internationally, he speaks about individual sovereignty. And you think, so we really do have someone who is unable to see the effects of some of the measures he's put in place.
Yeah. And I think that, like, in light of, the violation of people's privacy, that is a criminal offense. And it isn't necessarily that that the government did that. Like you said, somebody hacked the account and spread the information, but Candace Malcolm was showing journalists on social media.
I'll have that link in the show notes page. Video will be queued up to the time frame when that happened too.
Yeah, and so she was showing like numerous journalists exposing people's private information, exposing, hey, okay, this person donated this much, and they live here. Mm-hmm. Right. So you saw some of that going on social media. And at that point, like, right, that's when you shut down an account, right? Because that's a violation of someone's privacy with the doxing.
Yeah, doxing. Twitter
for those.
Normally...
Yeah. That's right. For those of you who don't know what doxing is, the definition is doxing is the act of publicly revealing previously private personal information about an individual or organization, usually via the internet. So even like that term doxing, like you ask the average person, they'll be like, what's that? But we live in the age where now we have to consider, like, okay, our private information, we're always entering it online, and then it gets exposed. So it was just one of those things where, at least, government could have, Trudeau could at least denounced it and say, hey, look, yeah, we're not about that life, so cut it out.
Instead,
that's very sad.
CBC was like jumping all over it. They were, without doxing anyone, they were exploiting the doxing.
Oh, they were, for sure. You know what they did?
Didn't they call people for comment?
They did. They called the same people that I know whose information got leaked. CBC reached out to them.
So your friends or your contacts who had their account frozen had CBC call them for comment. For comment
as to why they gave money. And I also know of
that's wild.
Other people who, it wasn't CBC, but their local, because this was their local news, reached out to them asking them why they gave money. And we're talking about the news, CBC is probably the largest fake news. It's one of the most distrustful news organization to me. Like, some of the things that have happened seem highly unethical, but I don't know why it is that Canadians love CBC, and you guys could probably give me a good reason why Canadians continue to love CBC. But
yeah, but I think I can answer that a little bit, just because I see it firsthand within my family, especially just the older generation. And I said it on the last show when I talked about my trip to the convoy, that there's a generation of people that grew up with CTV, City Pulse, and even my grandparents. Like, it's funny, that's all they watch is the news. I remember as a kid growing up, that's all they watched was the news. And so, like, we're in a generation now where people, like, there's individual journalists, right? Who independent journalism. And we know that, like, we live in an age where, yeah, you can find your independent journalists anywhere. YouTube, Twitter, podcasting, blogging, whatever. But there's still a generation, even millennials who don't even know yet, where the only outlet they know is CP24. And part of that is the bombardment of the screen time, right? Like, think about it. Everywhere you turn, there's a screen. Like, even in the elevator, right? In the elevator, you're getting your updates. Even the other day, I started getting these updates on my phone from some news outlet that I'm like, wait, why is this even activated? But people need the discernment to be able to say, okay, I'm making a conscious decision to decipher what's going on and looking at other outlets and at least balancing, your content with right and left content and knowing the difference between the two, and being able to find the faults between the right and the left to discern what's going on.
Yeah, I think you are right about that. It would be hard to break out of essentially what seems like a matrix for older generation if that is what they grew up with and if that's what they've been relying for 40, 50 years to, because once you're in it, you don't really notice the difference, right? The changes that have taken place because it's so slow and ever evolving.
Yeah,
it's like Tim Hortons, right? It's not the coffee's absolutely terrible.
That's because McDonald's stole their beans. But anyway,
it is. McDonald's has the good coffee.
So moving in a slightly different.
I want to say with CBC. So the Canadian Taxpayer Foundation just launched a defund the CBC and end media bailout, and apparently, like, they've had a couple petitions that have done really well. Mm-hmm. This one alone had got 50,000 signatures in a week. And wow. I was listening to I want to say it was an interview on True North, but I could be wrong, like Andrew Lawton or something. I'll have to see if I can find it. But they were saying, like, that quickly to get that many signatures is uncommon. And so,
yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see see what the result is if it actually. Right.
So, and I was going to say, I think the problem with CBC is a little bit of what you said, sort of the legacy, right? Like, for me as a hockey player, you got CBC's Hockey Night in Canada. That's like this nostalgia thing. But I think also because we're so bombarded with, like, American TV and American content, I think a lot of people have this, like, sense that without a government funded Canadian, entity, we would lose all sort of heritage or Canadian, content. And I just think it's, poor thinking as opposed to, not to say that there isn't some level of, like, it's a reasonable concern. Hey, how do we make sure Canadian content is fostered and grows and doesn't just get snuffed out by American content and preserve our culture? But clearly, CBC's gone from any sort of heritage focus to a propaganda.
Yeah, that's essentially it. That's probably the best way to put it.
Now moving in a slightly different direction in regards to the convoy and the bank accounts being frozen, it brought up the conversation of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. And there was an article from CBC talking about there was funds that was sent through crypto, and those were also frozen. Do you want to speak on that a bit? As you're a crypto guy as well.
Agree or disagree with our views? Give us your 2 cents. You can leave your comments on any of our social media platforms or email us at sixcentsreport@gmail.com.
6 cents makes change. 6 cents makes change. 6 cents makes change.
So what ended up happening was certain central exchanges gone on board, and I think out of pressure is what I'm understanding, got on board with what the Canadian government said and implemented that they would they would freeze the assets of people who the Canadian government deemed as, at that point, terrorists. Right? That's what the Liberal government called some people who participated in the Freedom Convoy as terrorists. So they did do that, and the reason that was possible,
I would say they did that because they wanted to leverage terrorist finance legislation.
Yeah. I think, and even the way that they spoke about, they said this is foreign funded, which turns out just a few days ago, the head of FinTrack came out and said, actually, this is not foreign funded. This is like 89% Canadians who gave this money. But the reason it's possible is because these are centralized exchanges, right? They're a crypto company, but essentially they're not decentralized, and a lot of them are still part of FinTrack, or they have to be signed. They have to be a member of FinTrack, I believe, and that's why when you buy cryptocurrency on exchanges, you have to do your KYC or know your customer stuff, right? Where you send in your passport, the first page of your passport, or a government issued ID, so that the central exchange can say, okay, this is a real person. We can document it, and then they're allowed to connect their bank account. Which makes it easy, which makes it more accessible for people who are newer to cryptocurrencies. Because right now it's, even though we're still early in the S curve, a lot of people, I mean, not early, but sort of in the middle, a lot of people are still nervous, right? They don't know what's happening. Am I going to buy it? And then, my Bitcoin's going to disappear. But this KYC process actually helped bring in a lot of people. So Canadian government took advantage of that and said, look, you guys already need the KYC, so you know who these people are. If we gave you their names, you could just freeze their assets. They can't withdraw any of their cryptocurrencies. Neither can they deposit anything to buy more. And so I think the funniest one to me was when they reached out to Nunchuck, which is a self-custody wallet. And I think it's the Ontario. Nunchuck. Yeah, go for it, Joel.
I was going to say, it's a software that allows people to utilize a software hardware combo to essentially self-custody your assets, right? So he's talking about centralized exchanges, right? What happens there is, like, if I use Newton, they control my wallet, but they're sort of my custodian on my behalf. Nunchuck essentially is a company that helps me be the custodian of my wallet.
Yeah, like you can create your own. You essentially need an email. And then you create your own Bitcoin wallet, and that's it. Like, they can't do anything to it. It's also similar to like a multi-sig wallet. If multi-sig wallet, there are multiple multi-sig wallets or hardware wallets where once your crypto goes to these wallets, that's gone. Like, you own it and you become your own bank. Like, nobody can take that money from you. Doesn't matter. Unless they have their
control of the custodian piece.
Yeah. So the Ontario Supreme Court or judge reached out and said, "Hey, can you freeze the assets?" Right? They did it in a quote, but can you freeze the assets of individuals who participate in the Freedom Convoy? And Nunchuck responded very cheekily and said, "You guys should Google what self-custody wallets are. And then when the Canadian dollar goes to zero, we'll be here to help you," is what they responded with.
I think that was a tweet, right? Because they actually had a full letter that was like, "I don't think you understand how crypto works.
Yeah.
That we actually intentionally help people so that this couldn't happen."
Yeah. Yeah, they wrote a full-on letter in response, which is, so I mean, I applaud Nunchuck for doing that. And I wish more of the centralized crypto exchanges did it, but I mean, I can see why it would be hard, but at the same time, the whole point of crypto, I'm sure there are a few exceptions to this rule, but the majority of people who the early adopters of crypto, right? And these are the early adopters are the ones who ended up building some of these companies. They are almost always libertarian leaning, right? Somewhat distrusting of government. So then for them to participate in this tyrannical Canadian government request is concerning, to say the least. But at the same time, I think for anybody who is participating in crypto and have been watching and have been on the sideline, this is a good time for you to realize, that could be me whose assets gets frozen. Right? And that could be me who once, not to go down a different rabbit hole, but once, CBDC comes in, centralized central bank digital currencies come into play, that is that we go from banks being frozen and you can't move it for 30 days to actually you are incapable of sending this money from your account to Darnell and Joel's 6 Cent account, because we deem 6 Cent account as a terrorist podcast group that spews hate speech. So it's impossible for me to send my digital currency, because now the Canadian government has programmed it, put it in code that I cannot. It's impossible for me to send money to you, and this is why actual crypto, not centralized crypto, is important for people to get on board with. Obviously, learn about it, but I think this is a good indicator. Like we're at like what's the word? Precipice of a world where we can become more and more like China or less and less like China.
Sounds like a good idea for an episode.
Yeah. So I mean, we're getting close to wrapping up, and I'll tease.
What?
Well, not quite there yet, but we're getting close. But I mean, me and IJ. Well, we'll continue this crypto deep dive a little bit in an exclusive on our Buy Me a Coffee page. So if you're appreciating this, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into it. But before we do, I want to touch on the CBDC stuff, because I think what's funny is what society should actually want is the exact opposite of what central bank digital currencies are going to do.
Well, Joel, why don't you save that for the Buy Me a Coffee?
Well, because because I think it's good here. It's good in this conversation, because it's not getting into the specifics just yet. But the point is this: what we really, really want, and what as a society, what we should call on, is transparency of government spending.
That is yes, right? It's highly impossible.
Well, but on crypto, it's not.
Yeah.
Right? Because public ledgers. So if anything, what governments are trying to do with central bank digital currencies, which is control, monitor, and have massive surveillance of all of the citizen spending, is that what we actually want from politicians, right? We want accountability. They're actually spending our money. So if anything, we have a claim to know how it's spent. Right? So I would argue, or I should be prepared to defend against some claims regarding, let's call it government spying, sort of defense type spending. Okay, there's an argument to be made that a section of government spending needed to be protected. But with regards to the idea of what companies are getting bailed out, what companies are getting government funding, right? Where is our taxpayer corporate welfare going?
Actually going, right.
Right? That like, if you want success and prosperity of a society, you want that type of spending to be held to account. Was it productive? Was it a good use of funds? But if we don't even have transparency in where it's going, it's very hard to ask those questions. And we all know politicians are masters of the spin game, because that's what it is. It's about selling what you did, not just doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And so what's concerning is that we're going to, with central bank digital currencies, what you're getting is not crypto. What you're getting is digital currencies, which we already have technically, right? With the way our bank works, like Darnell said, right? How many people actually use cash? Most people just log into their account, pay their bills, use a credit card, right? There's no credit card. It's literally a digital currency with very, very poor infrastructure.
Yeah. But now it's going to be programmable, and that's a scary part. Where
as
they can
opposed
program it
to crypto, which is and maybe IJ, you can speak to this a little bit, like the idea of open source or open code that everybody can see. It's so transparent. So why don't you, we did a bit of an episode on crypto. So why don't you for the maybe tease what we're going to hash out a little bit more. And really this conversation came from, and most so what we're going to talk about in the Buy Me a Coffee exclusive came from a Twitter back and forth with me and you regarding regulation and innovation in crypto space. So I'll put that in the show notes page as well. But maybe you can speak to a little bit about, the underlying technology and as I said, the open source nature / transparency that comes along with most, if not all, crypto projects.
Yeah. So I mean, the best way, I guess the simplest way to understand crypto in terms of why the technology itself is revolutionary is that everything. So Web 2, which is the world we live in, right? It helped a lot of people get rich through large companies, big tech companies. But the people who made the most money were the ones, were not the users, but the ones who created the actual thing, and the users got very little share in the profit.
Other than the benefit of the products,
other than the benefit of the product, right? So like we're using,
it's substantial. That's still an important thing to recognize.
Yeah, it is very good because it allows us to be where we are now.
Cost of living.
And so like Facebook I think Facebook's probably the best example for most people, and it's that. Anytime you use a free product on the internet, you are essentially the cash cow, right? Your data's being sourced out and being bought by other people. Whereas with crypto, what it allows you to do is it allows the network nodes, people, the users, to become owners and participant of the success of the product, which has never really been there before. So now, I'll give you a good example. There's the Ethereum has Ethereum Foundation, which they have multiple projects. One of them is the ENS domains, which is like the .eth domain, which allows the person who owns an ETH domain to essentially own their own domain. So most people think, like I have a website, ijmakan.com. I think I own it. I technically don't own it. GoDaddy owns it, right? GoDaddy can shut me off if they deem me to be reprehensible and have opinions that are against the government. They can turn my website off just like that, just like Shopify did of some of the stores. Whereas with an ETH,
what Bill C10, C11, I think is what it's now called, proposes for the government, right? Massive censorship of any content they deem is not Canadian enough.
Yes.
They could call up GoDaddy and say, you're in our jurisdiction. We have legislation that allows us to turn you off.
Yep. That's it. 100%. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. That's actually a great point. That's it. That's it. So, and inside of Web 2, which we are all existing in and thriving inside in one sense, that's what can happen. But inside of Web 3, which is crypto, once you have an ETH domain, that's yours. It's not going anywhere. And so the example of participating and getting and being rewarded for being an early participant would be myself, who I have an ETH domain, and I got it, sometime last year. And as a result of me being an early participant in the ETH domain, I got rewarded ENS coins, just like hundreds and thousands of other people who were early adopters. And some people got paid a lot of money. Some people got significant, right? But the reward was like essentially you wake up one day and you have thousands of dollars in your MetaMask wallet, right? Because you participated and you were an early adopter of that product. And that's the power of crypto in terms of actual network usage. But in terms of financial usage, it's like you become your own bank. And I think it's hard for most of us to realize what that actually means, because we are somewhat dependent and have always been dependent on somebody else or some other organization to manage our cash, right? And so then it's a risk to become your own bank, because let's say you lose your seed wallet, a seed phrase, or you lose your private key. Obviously that money's gone. Nobody's going to get it for you. Like, it's gone. But it also gives you much greater power to use that money as you please. Money is not the right word here. Funds to use as you please. And so the program itself is powerful because it rewards the network nodes over the centralized group that's in charge.
And I think just, as we wrap, I'm going to wrap up after this, but I think, drawing a parallel to Facebook, right? Because I think Facebook's a good example, because Facebook, like distributed ledger technology or crypto in general, has the benefits are reaped as the network grows.
Yeah.
Right. And the difference being in Facebook's case, the users benefited purely based on their user experience growing because of the larger network. But they didn't reap in the wealth generation of the business that went along with it.
That's right.
And it might have been, I started a group. I started all these things that Facebook was exploiting to draw more people in, but I was the product, and so I received no benefit. Whereas in crypto distributed ledgers, as you're describing, well, by me investing my time, my efforts, by, obviously I may have to pay a little bit to sort of participate, right? I'm guessing maybe you had to spend a little bit of ETH to get your ETH domain, as opposed to just getting it for free. But now, as the network grew, you actually are reaping in the growth or the benefits.
Exactly.
And so the system itself is actually designed, and I mean, there's crypto economics and different, token economics or different terms thrown around. But part of it is that there's a let's say, rather than crypto, which partners with government, rather than Facebook and Google, which we see partner with government as partially a means for them to grow their network effects, the crypto distributed ledgers are partnering with the users to incentivize the users to help grow the network in a manner that benefits the users as well as the entire network as a whole. So I just thought, sort of layering what you've said with sort of the Facebook contrast, because there's such a parallel in the network effect or the network size having an impact on the value of these systems or companies in the case of Facebook.
Yeah, I mean, you said it very well.
So as we're gonna transition into a little crypto special, deep dive for our Buy Me a Coffee exclusive, and again, that'll be in the show notes page. When this episode comes out, the let's call it part 2 of the conversation will probably come out a couple days later. So this is going to come out on March 11th on Friday morning. I would say by middle of the following March 16th, or maybe a little bit earlier, the part 2 of our conversation will be on Buy Me a Coffee. So for anyone subscribed, you'll get access. For IJ, for the listener, where can they reach out to you? I mean, you already mentioned IJMakan.com.
Right. Twitter, Twitter is IJ Makan, IJMAKAN. You can DM me. I mean, I'm on Twitter.
Cool.
Tweety.
Cool. Yeah. That's the best way to reach out with you. Okay, so we'll put that in the show notes page.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?
Madden and Mitchell Media.